Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Post-Military Podcast. Today on the show, we have Navy veteran Kristy Nilsson. Kristy is an Australian expat who left Australia to join the U.S. Navy. Kristy served in the Navy as a Seabee in San Diego and deployed with SEAL Team 7. After leaving the service, Kristy wrote her book, The Power of Elite Teams, and also started her podcast, The Elite Edge. Both properties focus on leadership lessons from unique individuals from all around the globe. In addition to her podcast, Kristy provides consulting to businesses on how to foster elite leadership within their organizations. As always, there are timestamps in the description that highlight the major portions of our conversation for your convenience. Finally, if you like the content, I would ask that you not only like and subscribe here, but check out Kristy's show and book, which are linked in the description below. Thank you so much for being here today, and I hope you enjoy the episode.
Do solemnly swear
Do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Post-Military Podcast. With me today is a friend and fellow podcaster coming from where in Spain?
We're stationed in Rota,
Rota,
South
Spain.
Carolina. Mhm.
Kristy Nilsson. Kristy, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Oh,
I
I'm
don't know if
excited
I'm
about
excited to be here, but I'm curious to be here. So we'll figure out what happens.
it. Well, I was on your podcast first. Now it's my turn. Now it's my turn to be the driver, and I'm very excited about it. For everyone out there who is listening, Kristy has her own podcast, The Elite Edge, and you all is your book also titled The Elite Edge? Is that
No, the book is called The Power of Elite Teams.
Okay. Power of Elite Teams, and then the podcast, The Elite Edge. Kristy has been making a lot of content about leadership and the power of elite teams, where she goes and interviews military leaders around the world who talk about their experience and give advice on how you, if you are in a leadership position, can better well, position your teams by either A, attracting these people, or also learning from their leadership lessons to improve your current leadership postures. If you have not checked her out yet, I would highly encourage you to do it. She's putting out really amazing content with some truly fascinating people. And honestly, I think the most impressive thing about it is I'm a US dude and I attract a US audience and I have US guests. And the fact that you've been really pulling military members from all around the globe is just it's a really fascinating perspective, and I think it's one of the things that makes you truly unique in the space is because
Mhm.
you just can't really tune into a lot of places to hear someone from England or someone from another country's military talk about what leadership is like in their cultures, and I've really found that super fascinating listening to your episodes.
Yeah, I've been really fortunate with the caliber of guests that have agreed to come on my show, have wanted to talk to me and share their stories. And sometimes I have to pinch myself when I'm talking to somebody. I'm like, man, like a little bit of imposter syndrome kicks in. You're like,
Oh, for
why
sure.
would this person want to talk to me? Like, I am nobody and they're just this badass human.
Mhm.
But the conversations, and they all start the same way, kind of like, yeah, this is my life. But then you pull out these amazing insights that these people have. And like you said, like the ability to get stories from people who served in the British forces or the Australian forces, like those conversations are invaluable to share.
It's really cool. We're going into some spoiler territory for your background. Do you think because you come from a more global background, do you think that that has helped you in your ability to connect with people around the world versus just in the United States?
Oh, absolutely. If I hadn't had the upbringing I've had and lived the places I've lived, there's, I feel like I would not be maybe as open to having, like, to even making those bridge connections because you get very isolated. The United States is very large, but it's also very contained. Like, if you grow up in the United States, first of all, you're incredibly fortunate, but you also are then kept within this boundary. And it's very few people who have been fortunate enough to have experiences like I've had. I grew up in Asia and Australia, and being the weird kid at school who kept moving around all the time makes you very good at being a sponge. Like you can just fit in and talk to people because the people you're talking to, you have no idea where they're going to say they're from. Like it's one of the greatest things I found is none of us actually know what the hell is going on in anyone else's life. And I like to say that we've never been so connected with the internet. We've never been so disconnected. And we're so quick to make assumptions of people based off of their social media. But the power of a conversation is just incredible. But yeah, my background and where I've grown up and the places I've been has absolutely made that easier for me.
That's awesome. And I've had this conversation with a couple of different veterans about just the the isolation of Americans, which is beautiful in some sense. I don't think a lot of people in America really appreciate what that means though, just because you don't unless you leave the isolation tank. But
Yeah.
I had a conversation with a guy yesterday when I was recording that was like that went along the lines of, it's in America. If you're born in America, you have a reasonable there's a reasonable chance that you could go your entire life and never witness an act of violence. And like that's a truly beautiful thing that I don't think a lot of people appreciate, considering what a lot of places in the world are like outside of the United States.
Yeah.
And I think that yeah, I think that a lot of people don't have that perspective, and it's good that there are people like you who do have that perspective, who can say this
Mhm.
place is cool. It's isolated, but it's cool, and I appreciate bringing people like you on to bring that perspective.
There's this sense of like there's two Americas, right? There's the America the rest of the world sees on TV,
Mhm.
and then there's the real America. And the real America is when you turn your TV off and you go talk to your neighbors.
Mhm.
I immigrated to the United States when I was 23. I made that choice. I didn't move to the United States I see on the TV. I moved to the United States because of everything that was possible for me. I know that sounds strange considering I moved from Australia, but at that time, there were still boundaries up for women in the service. And the idea of America is so beautiful that there's a reason people like me and millions of others fight to immigrate to the United States. And it's not because it's the America that everyone sees on TV or social media. It's none of that. It's actual American values that people find appealing and want to be a part of.
Yeah, you can still make you still have the chance to make more of yourself in so many different directions here than you do in a lot of different places, and I think that that's a truly beautiful thing. But before we gloss over and move into why you immigrated to the United States, why were you moving? So you're an Australia, you were born an Australian citizen, correct?
I was born an Australian citizen, but I was born in Hong Kong.
Oh wow.
So I
And
was,
why'd you
yeah.
move around so much?
My dad had a really good corporate job. My dad grew up in a farm in Western Australia. He likes to tell me that the farmhouse he grew up in didn't have a floor. They were bone broke, and he got his first job at a grocery store after he fell into a combine, had a farming accident, and nearly lost his leg. And he started working at the local grocery store and he moved his way up through management. And then he got an opportunity to take a job overseas in Asia. And he basically lied his way into the job. They said, do you know any Mandarin? And he was like, yeah, sure. He's one of those people that can pick up languages quite quickly. So he fudged it. And when he got there, learned some words on the plane and then just fit in. And so I was an expat brat. So I grew up in Hong Kong and Taiwan for the first 10, 11 years of my life. I was I like to joke that I was like the strange kid because I'm white. I've had bright blonde hair when I was a kid, and walking around in like the Taipei Zoo or anything, people come up and they like pat your hair and they want to touch your blonde hair. And I remember thinking, man, this is a really strange way to grow up. But and then but yeah, it was my dad's job and I loved it. And my dad was also in the Hong Kong Army. He was in the regiment out there, which was British regiment. So he went to Sandhurst and got trained up. But yeah, that was my childhood.
And so
Mhm.
then you were in Hong Kong with your family, and then did you go back to Australia for a time before you headed to the United States?
Oh, I moved around a lot as a kid. So Hong Kong, Taiwan, we went back to Hong Kong, and then my parents split up and we moved to Australia with my mom. And then life circumstances, for whatever reason, we ended up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, for a couple years after that. And then Redondo Beach, California. And then I ended up back in Australia, and I was emancipated at the age of 17. And then I stayed there. I joined the Australian Army, and life being what it is, you feel like sometimes you're being constrained and you need to break out of everything. And like, I didn't have a bad life. I had a brilliant life. I just needed to move forward. I needed to change and my location. And so I packed my entire life into a couple of cardboard boxes, dropped them off at my aunt and uncle's house, filled up a suitcase with what I could and a backpack, and I boarded a plane to the United States. And less than 6 months later, I was in the Navy.
So for you, what was your desire to initially enter the Australian Armed Forces? Yeah, we'll start there.
So to be fair, I had no interest. I didn't think I was going to end up in the Australian Defense Force. Like when I was a kid, I knew very young I was going to join the military. I am that person. I just knew. We were living in Hong Kong, and the USS Carl Vinson aircraft carrier pulled into Hong Kong Harbor, and my class got to go on a field trip on this aircraft carrier. And I remember standing on the bridge thinking, man, this thing has been all around the world. These people are getting to have all these experiences, and they're having adventures. And to me, that just seemed like the coolest thing in the world, was to just be able to, like, you're on a ship and you're working, but you're getting to travel the whole world. And I went home and I was like, I'm joining the United States Navy when I grow up. And my parents looked at me and were like, sure. Yeah, sure. I don't know. I don't actually even know there was no overly patriotic reason for a 10-year-old to want to join the services. I ultimately joined the Australian forces because of 9/11. 9/11 happened 10 days after my 18th birthday. I watched it unfold live on TV like a lot of people, and it was a feeling that I couldn't put it off. I knew that I was going to try and get back to the States and try to fulfill this dream of mine, but it then morphed into, okay, I need to do it more quickly, and I need to change maybe what it looks like.
And so then you served in the Australian Defense Force for 5 years before
Just
you left.
4. Yeah, 4 years.
Okay.
Mhm.
And I think for a lot of people, especially at the age of 23, you're not looking to shake stuff up to like really any significant magnitude. And so then I would say that leaving Australia, immigrating to the United States, and then joining the US Navy, I know you wanted to do that when you were
Mhm.
younger, but that is a significant shakeup of your life. And why do you think at that young age you had the initiative to push through whatever fear you had to get that done?
I'll tell you that at 23, I didn't feel 23. I felt 45. I had had a lot of life experience very young. I'm one of those people say, oh, you grew up very quickly. That's a blessing and a curse. You have a bit of your childhood taken away from you. So you end up making adult decisions for yourself at an age where people aren't thinking about things like that. My senior year of high school, I put myself through my final year of high school. I was in a boarding school. I was working on the school grounds. I was paying for my school fees myself at 17. And so by the time I hit 23, it wasn't so much this is like just a cool change. It was, I need to do this if I'm going to claim back anything in my life that I've chosen. And I didn't really, now like looking back on it, because I haven't really reflected on that moment too much. I don't think I've ever actually even been asked about it. It was something I needed to do. I needed to leave my home, the city I was living. I needed to change my life on my terms. And it looked crazy to everyone. Everyone I told I was moving, and they were like, what are you doing? Like, we're here whenever you want to come back. And I didn't actually think about moving back to Australia and being like, man, I made a huge mistake, until I got to boot camp. And like the first time I watched somebody, like a grown adult, choose to wet their bed at night because they didn't want to be at boot camp or go screaming, crying into the bathroom during a physical like beatdown, I started to question my life choices at that moment. I was like, what did I do? How have I ended up here? And so then people would ask me, like, why are you here? I'm like, I thought I was going to Disneyland, ended up in Chicago.
Yep.
I don't know. Life happened.
I don't know what to tell you. But I also think that there's some kind of like, there's some beauty in, I don't want to say naivety because you knew what you were doing, but this like the beauty in making a decision without overthinking the decision. When I went to the Air Force Academy, I knew that it was a school in Colorado that was loosely connected to the military. That's what I knew going in. I didn't know anything else, and I
Perhaps the Air Force, maybe.
yeah, exactly. And I'm lucky that I did that because if I had done any research on like what the hazing that happened freshman year and all this stuff, like I probably wouldn't have shown up. But I showed up because I was dumb, and at that point I was like, I'm not gonna like be a bitch and then leave. Like I can't go back now. And so I was exactly. So I was stuck. And so I think I don't know. It is always one of those interesting questions of like, if someone's stuck the same question to me and they have like, why'd you decide to go to the Air Force Academy? It's like, I just did. Like I was lucky that in my naive young mind, I made a great life decision. And it's always funny to like, I always feel weird asking people that question because it's like, dig into this, and it's like there wasn't a lot to dig into then, and there certainly isn't now. So
time hasn't made this decision-making process more complex. It was a few amount of ingredients went into it, and then decision made.
Exactly.
But I also miss life being like that, though. Because I can see how I've changed, and there is a part of me that's like, man, I do miss that Kristy a little bit because that Kristy was fearless in all regards. And life happens, but there is a part of me that's like, man, that was an insane thing to do, but it worked. So it wasn't too crazy.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't end up in a bridge.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I think we as human beings, we are enamored by the stories of like people who just go into the unknown and then make stuff work. I think that if you look at American history or really honestly just like world history, everyone is always fascinated with the explorer or the colonist or the settler who went and just did shit. And that's a story that everyone loves and can buy into. And so I think on one hand we love that thing of like, I just showed up and I made it work and it worked out great. But on the other hand, as you get older, as you get your battle scars, you go, I understand the cost of a bad decision more. And balancing out those things is hard because there is a lot of freedom in not overthinking your decisions. But at the same time, sometimes thinking about your decisions is important.
So yeah, sometimes you need to weigh the pros and cons of what you're doing. You're not always lucky. Sometimes you make a decision and you lose all your money on it, or you end up at boot camp. I'm not entirely sure how I got here, but I did. And
here I am.
Yeah, and it's just, the thing is too, is like we have such a strange world. People love those stories, but they don't like relating to people who do that kind of thing. Like I have been very not ashamed of my life story. It's not the right word. Very quiet about my life. I'm not a very braggadocious person. I don't like to be like, oh, I've lived all of these places and I've had all of these experiences, because I am probably a victim of the whole like I let other people's opinions sort of like dim my light a little bit because I don't want to make them feel any kind of way. And when you tell people who I think are lucky enough to have grown up in the same town, they've got friends they can go visit, their families are what I would consider a normal family. I think those are incredibly blessed people. But when you tell someone like that, like, hey, this was my life story, there's almost like this chasm that opens up of like, I don't know how to relate to you. So while the stories are fascinating, it can also be an incredibly lonely journey when you're trying to find your people.
I think the chasm thing is interesting. I think it's hard to, I don't know. I think that people just aren't good conversationalists. Like I think you like there's empathy and there's sympathy. And I think that I might not be able to empathize with you putting yourself through your last year of high school or moving to another country to join another country's military, but it is fascinating and I am very curious about talking to you about it. And through this conversation I can gain some understanding and some sympathy for what you've gone through. Can I empathize with what you're feeling? Maybe if we boil it down to like really base levels of like fear of the unknown or trying to make things work after you make a bad decision or just
Mhm.
life happening to you and you have to like scramble. Like I can empathize with those base feelings, but maybe not the exact situation. And I think really when you say finding your people, you're really just looking for people who have the ability to talk to you in a way that builds a connection versus just going like, whoa, man, that's crazy.
Mhm.
And then the conversation's
Yeah.
over.
And then it's
Uh,
over. Yeah.
yeah. And but I definitely agree. It is interesting talking like my family moved a ton within the United States, and it is interesting talking to someone who's like, you seriously lived in this town your entire life and you never moved? Like,
Mhm.
that's wild. Like you've never been outside of the
Yeah.
state?
You're still friends with someone you went to kindergarten with? Like, I
Yeah,
find that
like
fascinating.
no, it's crazy. Like I'm like, whoa, that's insane. So
Mhm.
I'm like, tell me what that's like. And yeah, it is really interesting. But for you, this is a podcast about transitions in life. And so what was the transition like from living in Australia to being in the US Navy?
Oh my
Besides
god.
watching someone get
So
rocked in boot camp and thinking you made a horrible decision.
yeah, there was a lot of people who at boot camp were like, "I've made a terrible decision," and I was actually fascinated by the lengths some people would go to remove themselves from the situation that they found themselves in. But I will say, I did not think because of I grew up in American schools and I had actually lived in the United States previously. I thought I would be fine. Like I thought I would just pack up, move, and it would be no big deal. But the 6 years I had in between, I got very used to Australian way of life and Australian people and Australian mannerisms and Australian sense of humor. And the culture shock, I honestly was surprised that I had culture shock moving to the United States. Everyone is very sensitive. Sarcasm is not a huge thing. There's so many things you can choose from. Just going to the grocery store is an overwhelming experience that I find hilarious because going to the grocery store, I feel it should be a very straightforward event in your life. I need to get this, this, and this. And then you get there, and the beauty of capitalism is you stand there and you're like, I have 60 different types of bread to choose from. And I don't know what kind of bread I like because I haven't tried 60 different kinds. But people's mannerisms were very different, and the way Americans handle conflict, interpersonal conflict, was very different for me. And yeah, I don't think I'd ever seen anyone in Australia take drastic actions to quit something before. Like there's this thing called the Aussie Battler, like, and it is in it's just our Australian battle spirit. Like you just fight through whatever shit situation you find yourself and you find a way forward. In the army, they call it the Anzac spirit. The Anzacs, you guys can Google that on your own. But so that was how I was raised. And so when I'm looking at people not acting in accordance with that, I didn't really know what to do. And because of my history, I was made the recruit chief petty officer of my boot camp division, a position I tried to quit no less than 6 times, walking into my RDC's office and being like, this is insane. Like, I do not know what to do about what's going on out there. I don't want to do this. And he'd be like, great, now you're not allowed to quit because you want to. And I don't know how to relate. I really didn't. And well, driving also, if you've ever had to go from a different country to driving, and the first time you've had to drive is on the I-5 through Los Angeles, it is absolutely terrifying.
Is it left side of the road in Australia?
It is. So the steering wheel is on the incorrect side of the vehicle. I was driving a manual with my other hand, and driving in Los Angeles is an experience that it's very hard to put into words. So it was weird, and it was, oh man, it took me a while to find my feet in the United States and figure out like how to do life. And I had to change the way I said things or change the phrases I use because people would be like, what?
Did you say what did you call McDonald's when you got over
Macca's.
there? Yeah. And what
Yeah.
did you call dollars?
Bucks.
Did you have a name for I knew an Australian dude who called it dollary doos, and I always thought that was like I thought that was the funniest shit ever.
No,
So,
I remember the one thing that stood out that sort of like you could have heard a pin drop was went out to get some drinks and I said my shout as I went up to the bar to get more drinks and everyone went, "What are you shouting about?" And I was like, "Oh gosh, I have to explain what this phrase means." And it just meant it was my round, like I'm buying the next round, like my shout, my treat. And when you go into in depth, it's like explaining a joke. It just loses all of its
oh
like
yeah.
sparkle afterwards.
Yeah.
You're like,
You're like normally when I say this, people get really excited, but all of you are confused.
And I was a mechanic, so learning to say aluminum and
Oh
wrench,
no, you're an aluminium person.
aluminium and
No.
yeah, bell peppers. I had to learn the word bell pepper because they're capsicums. I grew up with the word capsicum. Yeah, spanner is a wrench, a car.
Do you have an accent at the time?
I have a strange mixed accent. So
Okay.
my husband will tell everyone like when I drink or when he frustrates me, it comes out. Usually he's on the receiving end of it.
Okay.
But I did have a strange like Morphe accent. Like it was
Yeah.
kind of like this 50-50 weirdness. And I really had to concentrate on how I was talking. So people would stop being like, "Can you say that again? Can you say that again?" I'm like, "Oh my God, just listen to me. Like, just do what I'm asking you to do. Stop making this so weird." "Can you say that again? Like, can you say throw a shrimp on the barbie?" I'm like, "Oh, word, no."
You're like,
They're not even called shrimp in Australia. They're called prawns.
yeah, prawns is a mind-boggling thing for people who don't eat at restaurants that are from any other culture. They're like, "What's a prawn? Is that the same as a shrimp?" And it's like, it's the exact same thing. It's just a different word. It's like a bison and a buffalo. So,
Oh, see, I did ask that question though. I said, "What's the difference between a bison and a buffalo?"
there isn't one.
There
Same
isn't
thing.
one.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Welcome to America. Is a marsupial a kangaroo, Kristy? Like,
do when bald eagles fly, do you just hear freedom in the flap of their wings? People are like,
you
"Yes,
do.
you
Yeah.
do."
Yeah. It sounds like Toby Keith. So you said you were you're a mechanic in the Navy. So what did you do in the Navy?
I was a construction mechanic. I was a Seabee.
Okay.
Not a job I wanted to choose, I'll tell you that much.
Really?
No.
Walk me through your military career.
I went to the recruiter's office. Initially, I walked into the Spokane Valley Mall. Not Spokane Valley Mall. Yes, that was the first recruiter I met. But then later, when I moved back to California, I was in San Francisco, and I walked into the Vacaville Mall, and the recruiter's office is right
Wait,
there.
seriously?
Airport. Yeah.
I'm in Vacaville.
There you go.
Yeah.
So I joined the Navy.
Yeah. I'm filming in Vacaville, California. So,
I lived in Hercules. So when I joined, you know exactly what I'm talking about then.
Whoa.
And the Air Force recruiters was closed. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, that automatically disqualifies them. And in my head, I was like, I'm joining the Navy. But due diligence, make sure I'm making the right decision now that I'm here. And the Marine Corps, the Army one, I knew I had no interest in being in the Army. There's no reason. I just didn't want to do it. And so then I walked into the Marine Corps office And you have to understand, I came from a place where you kill snakes. You don't play with snakes. You kill snakes. And I walked in and they had a snake tank, but the snake was out of its enclosure and they were holding it. And like, do you want to turn hold it? And I was like, no, I want to break its neck. Like, what are you doing? And I was like, and they're like, so can we help you? I was like, I don't think so. I'm pretty sure this is a clear sign that I'm not interested in this conversation going any further.
That honestly sums up the Marine Corps really well, though.
You want to play with my snake?
In so many ways.
Censor that bit out.
That's okay. This podcast isn't for kids anyway.
Oh, God. I was right there. Come on.
I know. Yeah, no, I really laid that one up for you. Okay. So the Air Force says no. You didn't want to play.
The Air Force was closed. They weren't even there.
Yeah,
so
no, it's because they were
like,
too good. They were like, there's some bullshit training day or something like that, I'm sure.
I walked into the Navy office and I was like, hey, I want to join the Navy. And the guy looked at me and I'm 5'5", 125 pounds, fully clothed, soaking wet on my good days. And he was like, I didn't even have to work for this one. All right, come on in. And he's like, do you know what you want to do? I was like, I want to be a Navy diver. Like, I want to be a Navy diver. That's the only thing I want to do. I'm not interested in anything else. And he was like, okay, we have to do like your ASVAB pre-test and all of this crap. So I did it and I got like a 95 on the practice one. And he was like, oh my God. And you could just see like his recruiter had like lights going. And I didn't know what it was at the time. I do now. Like he just was like, I've got a female. She scores high on the ASVAB. I'm getting all my points. And he's like, okay, we'll make that happen. So off I went to the San Jose MEPS. And I was so excited. You go through all the weird stuff. And fortunately, like, I'd already had my modesty, like, taken away from me a couple times over. So I wasn't really freaked out about, like, any of that. But I sat down with the person who was helping me select my rate. And he's like, yep, okay, all sounds good. Fantastic. Before I bring up, like, get your contract and everything, I was like, I need you to go talk to the nukes. And I was like, I have no interest in that. Like, I don't want to be a nuclear anything because I want to see daylight. He's like, just check the box kind of thing. I was like, oh my God. So I sit down. The guy's like, do you have any interest in being I was like, no. I'm here because he told me to. And if I can just go back to him, that would be great. So I sit back down. The guy brings everything, types everything up. And then he goes, oh, shit. Hang on a second. I said, oh, that's not good. He goes, you're not a U.S. citizen. I said, no, I'm not. I thought we covered that already. He goes, you can't have this rate if you're not a U.S. citizen because you need a security clearance. And I was like, huh, I feel like that should have come up in conversation at some point. Recruiter's like,
it's like, now we got you. So
yeah. And he was like, do you have any interest in being in aviation? And I said, no, I don't want to be on an aircraft carrier. I don't want to work on the flight deck. He goes, the only thing I can do for you is we have machinist mate. And then there were 3 Seabee rates. It was builder, construction electrician, or construction mechanic. I always liked working on stuff. I've always been very like tinkery. I was part of like, this is such an early 2000s thing to say, but I was part of like the car club scene in Australia, in Perth. So like I'd been working on Subarus and stuff. So I was like, I can be a mechanic. That's no problem. And then I'll get to my rate or I'll get a commission. No big deal. So I signed for construction mechanic. Yeah. And then I shipped out for boot camp like 2 weeks later.
So you go through boot camp. Boot camp is boot camp. Anyone who's listening to this who is in the military or was in the military knows what it's like. And so what was your career like from that point on? Because you have you ended up in some pretty unique places for a Seabee.
I did. I ended up getting stationed in San Diego at the Amphibious Construction Battalion there, which everyone told me I won the lottery. Everyone like, oh my God, getting stationed in San Diego is just the best thing ever. At the time, I remember thinking it was a punishment because first of all, I didn't know anything about the Seabees. I didn't do any research before I went to boot camp. I didn't know shit about anything. And our ship at boot camp, I do have to tell the story in case there is a Seabee listening because they're going to laugh their asses off. My ship at boot camp was Ship 13, the Marvin G. Shields, the USS Marvin G. Shields. Now, Marvin G. Shields is the first and only Seabee to ever be awarded the Medal of Honor. And I pop off to my chief, who was also a Seabee at boot camp with, why couldn't we have gotten a cool ship name like the Enterprise or anything like that, like the Constitution? And he looked at me, and I swear to God, this bald man started to like sweat out of his sweat. And he goes, you have exactly 10 minutes to get down to the quarterdeck and back up here to tell me just how badly you fucked up. And I was like, what an odd thing to say. Like, all the way through my head. And I got down to the quarterdeck of our building, and there's a giant Seabee statue right in the center of it. Now, Navy boot camp, you don't see the quarterdeck. They take you through all the back stairwells. So I'd never seen this thing. And I was like, oh my God, I've done something terrible. And I'm like reading all of the things, and they've got his Medal of Honor citation. I was like, oh my God. And to make it worse, he was a construction mechanic. And I stood there, and I was like staring at the clock going, I'm going to die.
Like, this is my last day on Earth.
This is the last stupid thing that come out of my mouth was that I said that to this man. And he did. He absolutely destroyed me for about an hour before we went and got dinner.
I believe that.
But I will say, when I got to A school and they're like, does anyone know who Marvin G. Shields was? I was like the first kid, like, yes, me, I do. Pick me.
So funny.
But yeah, and I ended up in San Diego, which is a really unique place to be as a Seabee. They call it like the San Diego Shuffle. There's a lot of Seabees who, if you get lucky enough to get there, you just shuffle between all the commands in San Diego. And I was lucky enough to do that. When I reenlisted because I was able to get orders with Naval Special Warfare at their support unit. Now, to take those orders, I did have to give up my dual citizenship. So I finally had to go through and get my security clearance. And the idea of working with the teams, and I'd been on Coronado for 5 years, and we improved their berm, and we saw the BUDS classes running by, and we interacted with these guys all of the time. And I remember thinking, oh, I've got the opportunity to work with the Navy SEALs. And I'm an 80s baby, so that movie with Charlie, like that, we're like, I just want to go be a part of this. But the other part was, I remember interacting with the Australian SAS and thinking, if I ever get the chance to work with people who can operate in like the next level, I want to see if I can do it. So yeah, then I ended up at Naval Special Warfare and deployed with SEAL Team 7 in 2015. And then I left the Navy after that. And I think I don't think I could have left the Navy on a better high. I think if I had reenlisted and gone somewhere else, and I'll plug my own like chapter of my book, but there's a thing that happens when you serve with the next level up. Everything that's not that feels incredibly mediocre and unfulfilling. And so as much as I wanted to stay in, there was a problem like getting orders, and I was getting married, and it didn't work. It made more sense to get out. I do know now that I'm on the other side of the transition phase that I couldn't have asked for a better ending point to my naval career and my military career, really, because anything else after that would have just felt like a step backwards. Yeah, less is a perfect word for it. It felt like less.
I think that's a cool way to think about it, that you went out going out on a high. So when you decided that it was time to leave, what did that preparation look like for you? Did you do much? Like, were you more concerned with just getting out? Like, what was that mental state like for you? And because you'd already done what I'm interested in is you'd already made a massive life transition going from Australia to the States to join the Navy in the first place, but you did that in a younger mindset. Now you're older. Did you approach this transition in a similar fashion, or what changed for you?
I was definitely much more hesitant about what was coming next. I didn't just like make the decision and go, everything's going to work out fine, I'm going to land on my feet. I think I was trying to convince myself I felt like that because I hadn't really thought there would ever be an after. to the Navy. It's a strange thing to say, but when I was a kid and I was growing, I the only thing I ever wanted to do was be in the military. And so I never really even gave myself the opportunity to think, okay, what's going to come after? And of course there's an after. There's an after for everything we do. You know, there's an after high school, there's an after college. There's an if you get divorced, there's an after that. There's always an after to something. But I don't know, just some sort of mental block on it. I never looked at the after. I did know that I would be fine. Maybe arrogantly, I was like, I've got a college degree. I'm going to go to grad school. I don't think it's going to be hard to get a job. And it wasn't. I was like, I'm going to be fine. And I think it was fueled by a bit too by, I remember when my chief's looking at me and he's like, you're going to fail when you leave. And that phrase has always been something that I cannot stand that people use against other people, is like they instill this doubt in people. And I have spent a lot of my life proving people wrong. When you're 17 years old, putting yourself through school, not too many people are going to bet on you graduating. And people don't think that you're going to do this and you're going to be able to do that. And so I liked to prove people wrong. And a part of it was, I'm going to get out, I'm going to show this chief that I can do it. But I was scared and I was sad. I remember I turned in my quota to let my senior chief know, like, hey, I'm not reenlisting. Like, there's a quota space available for contracts. I don't really know what goes on the back end. I just know that's what it's called. And I went and sat in my truck and I cried. I was like, I can't believe this is over. But at the time, I didn't dwell on it for too long. I was like, okay, fine, it's done, moving on. But I felt very different doing that than when I left Australia. When I left Australia, I was like, this is awesome. This is an adventure. When I left the Navy, I was like, shoot, I don't really know what's going to happen. I'm a little nervous about it. My husband and I weren't married yet. And so I was like staring at this like gap of time where I wasn't active duty, but I wasn't a dependent. And I remember thinking that gap of time was huge. I was like, what happens if I get into an accident? Or what happens if this happens or this happens? And that gap of time seemed huge to me at the time. Whereas when I left Australia, I was like, whatever.
Do you wish that you would have dwelled on the emotions of your departure more now that you look back on it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely screwed up my transition process for myself by not allowing myself to recognize what was happening. That mentality of mine of like, just keep pushing forward. It prevented me from taking the time to recognize that I had closed a chapter of my life and instead was more outrunning the chapter of my life. And what I found was eventually everything catches up to you at some point. When you stop moving long enough, everything that's been following you will hit you. And I don't think I got to a good place about having left the Navy until maybe I've been out for 7 years, until maybe 3 years ago. We were living in northern Germany. That was when I finally was like, man, I didn't handle that. And now that I'm recognizing what it was, like I was grieving for the life that I thought I wanted, is the only really way I can explain that. Is I didn't allow myself the time to be like, this is not what I expected to happen, but that's okay. But it took me a long time to realize that being in the military was not my life. It was just a chapter of my life, and I have to be grateful for it, but I also have to let it go.
That's hard because the military really is so it there aren't a lot of organizations outside of the military that really demand every aspect of your life fall into lockstep. Like, I don't even know, like maybe you're in the clergy, you're a professional athlete, a politician maybe, but I really can't think of a lot of things where it's like you join the military and they go, every aspect of who you are has to fall in line with this thing.
Mhm.
And it's really like I don't believe that we talk about this concept enough of like it's really just insane how much of you gets wrapped up in this
Mhm.
thing, the military. It almost becomes like this like symbiotic relationship of like It's like if you like read comics or what, like you're Eddie Brock and the military's Venom, and then
Mhm.
like at some point like you can't like the separation of those two entities is incredibly catastrophic, and we don't we don't teach people how to manage that thing well at all. And yeah, no, like I get you. It's tough. It's tough to not go like shit. Who am I outside of the
Yeah.
military? Because you can't even view aspects of your life that are actually independent of the military without thinking, oh, but that's what I did when I was in the military. Like, so
Yeah.
I can't do that stuff now, which I don't know. What going before we dive into that more, something that I do want to ask you is what do you recommend to people who are about to make this life transition, whether it's getting out of the military or they're going to do something else in their life? How would you recommend that they have the confidence to continue forward
Mm.
with their decision, especially when they meet resistance, especially when there's like that chief that's like, that's just dumb choice. Dumb
Mhm.
choice. You're not going to make it because you will encounter resistance when you get out of the military because people who are in the military are like, but it's so safe in here. Like, why would you ever leave? Like,
Why would
why?
you
It's so
go to
nice.
bubble? Everything's so easy here. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, how would you recommend that people move past that kind of resistance, whether it's external or the internal self doubt?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is to give yourself a little bit of grace. Personally speaking, I can say that I was incredibly hard on myself because I wasn't figuring it out as fast as I thought I should be figuring it out. I thought, okay, I should be fine. I should be fine. This is not a big deal. And the times that I wasn't fine, I would beat myself up about it, be like, okay, but so give yourself a little bit of grace. Understand that it is a process. It's a big process. You are changing fundamentally how your life operates. And the other thing too is, and this is something that I got told by one of my podcast guests. He's a B2 pilot, and he actually had the same thing where people are like, why would you want to do that? That sounds crazy. And it is, but it is so true. You will never hear from people, you'll never hear anything negative from people who are doing more than you. You will only ever hear the negatives from people doing less than you or who cannot find in themselves the courage to take the step that you are taking.
Mhm.
And like my chief, like that chief, he's going to stay in until they kick him out. He won't do 20, he'll do 25 or 30, and he'll be a miserable shit for everyone because he can't see anything outside of that. First and foremost, recognize that the people who are doubting you because you are doing something that doesn't make sense to them and that they don't really have the courage to do themselves.
Mhm.
My friends in Australia who are like, why would you do this? They all live in the same neighborhoods. They go to vacation the same places. They've only ever left Australia once or twice in their life. They couldn't understand what I was doing. They didn't mean it in a negative way, but to them, it was like, this is too much for me.
Mhm.
When it comes to the self thing, that's a little more difficult. It's quite easy to deal with external factors because it's quite easy to tell someone to shut the fuck up, right? I don't need your negativity and I don't need your nonsense. Boom, cut that door off. When it's the voice inside your head, you really have to do the work to I called it I said to my friends, I said I made my demons my bros. Like if you're going to be here, that's fine, but you need to be working with me. Like if you're going to be the fear jerk, that's fine, but you're still going to be under my, like you got to be one of my bros. You can't be working against me. And it takes a lot of work to keep moving forward, but you're moving forward for a reason. You chose to leave for a reason. And it's not because you had a jerk of a chief, and it's not because, oh, screw the military, this is dumb, I'm out, whatever. You made the decision for a reason. Whatever that reason is, needs to be what you continue moving towards.
Mm. That's a really good thing to highlight, which is you need to really understand why you're leaving. Like you
Mhm.
have to have that guiding principle, because that's going to be, if you're just like, I fucking hate it here and I'm
Yeah.
getting out.
Yeah.
It's really easy for non-concrete reasoning to be blown apart by either self-doubt or other people. And so if
Mhm.
you are listening to this and you are about to make a life transition, whether it's moving from Australia to the United States or you're getting out of the military, if you understand why you are doing this,
Mhm.
then that will allow you to ride the wave. And sometimes it's positive things. Sometimes I wouldn't recommend it all the time, but it's negative. The guy who is on the episode prior to this, TR, he literally had a hate list when he got out of the army. Like he literally had like a 13 by 9 sheet of paper with like every time he got asked to do some like fundatory thing or he had to go do something he hated, he wrote it down and he kept this thing in his pocket on it so that the day they were like, "Hey, reenlistment," he like pulled the list out, read it all in the bathroom and is like, "I
Do
can't
not
do this." Yeah. And
do
so
not
like
do this.
yeah, like if it works, it works, but it's you really do have to have that thing
Yeah.
that will guide you through those storms of doubt or just people being assholes. And so something you just said that I thought was really interesting is you had really high expectations for yourself.
Mhm.
I believe I did the same thing, and I'm really curious for you. What were your expectations when you were getting out? And what should they have been now that you look back?
My expectations for getting out were I need to well, I wanted to go to grad school. I wanted to use my benefits. I was like, I need to get into a school. I need to get really good grades at that school. I need to get a job that's amazing. I need to have a perfect marriage. I need to have my house on lock. I need to be a great friend. I need to be all of the things that I thought the perfect civilian person was, right? Like all of that. I needed to be all of those things. What my expectation should have been was take a damn second. You can quit your job if you don't like it. You can try a couple of different things. You do not have to have it all figured out the day you pick up your DD 214. That is a myth and it's bullshit. Like anyone who's like, I got out of the Navy or I got out of the Army, and the very next day I landed my dream job and it was perfect. That, if that exists, that is the exception that proves the rule. And the rule is you do not really know who the hell you are when you take your uniform off. And I don't care if you served for a year or 4 years, there is still a process you have to go through that is leaving that behind. And it is okay. I wish somebody had been able to get through my thick head that it was okay to try some things and to quit and to fail more and to figure out who I wanted to work for and what I wanted to do instead of like, okay, even if I'm not happy, I can't quit because then I failed. Then I got out of the Navy and I've proved that chief right because I quit and that's failing. Quitting is failing. That's like beaten into your head. The expectation should be this might take me a little bit of time, but that's okay.
Yeah. Attempts matter much more than the success of the
Yeah.
attempt. And I think something that I would love your take on. This is something that I've been noodling around as I talk to more and more people. Do you think that I believe that the military transition is too job centric,
Mhm.
because we in the military confuse work and purpose because they're so closely aligned
Mhm.
in the service. Based off of your head movement, I'm assuming you agree with me. What do you think we could do to make it better?
I apologize to anyone who works in the TAPS program. That program is a damn joke. It's a waste of time, and you don't learn anything that a YouTube video can't teach you about writing a resume. And like you said, they make they re mm, They reinforce that concept that your job determines your value and determines your worth and determines if you don't have purpose, then you don't have worth. And personal purpose is incredibly powerful. But I think you and I talked about this last week. Anytime you assign your worth to something outside of yourself, you're setting yourself up for failure. TAPS I would love to see TAPS be a more holistic approach to transition. Talk about the things that so many people want to talk about, but we don't put any emphasis on. Talk about the fact that you're gonna feel a certain way when you get out. Make that conversation okay. Yes, getting a job is important if you want to pay the bills and you want to keep going. And if you're not retiring with a pension, yes, you need a job. If you don't want to get a job, that's cool. You don't have to get a job. You do you. But yes, a job is important, but it is not the metric of success post-service. There needs to be more information about how to move through the Veterans Affairs process effectively without losing your mind trying to get your benefits. Everyone knows you have benefits, but there's not a roadmap on how to transition. Okay, like here's some options for you. It's just we're going to write a resume and you're going to show up in business casual and you're going to pretend you're interviewing for jobs. It doesn't help me. It didn't help me. It didn't help me with anything. My first job post-Navy, I ended up working for somebody who was exactly like the person I had just been working for in the Navy. And I was like, I don't feel like I should have done. How did this happen? How did I end up working for the exact same type of human being? It needs to be a more holistic conversation around the transition process, not just the job change process.
It's funny. My perception of the resource, because my expectations when I got out, when I was transitioning out of the military I focused on two things exclusively: making sure my VA benefits were down. And I agree with you. I think that we don't really talk. There are resources out there that talk about how to navigate the VA process, but you really have to put in the time to like find them. Like it's not an easy journey, but it exists. And then as a tech guy, you go work for a big tech company, people think you're the shit and you're going to make a lot of money. And I did both of those things really well. And then I sat on the other side and I go, shit, I'm at my work from home job and I'm trying to figure out why I'm depressed all of a sudden. And we do and this isn't just a TAPS thing. I think this is a military. We both live on LinkedIn. I think it's a military transition influencer problem. I think that it's a TAPS problem. I think it's an in the military problem. It's the things you need to transition effectively from one chapter of your life or another has nothing to do with your job. It has nothing to do with the benefits you're getting. It has everything to do with, can you identify your purpose in life, and can you build a value set around those things?
Yep.
And we do a really bad job about that because talking about feelings is dumb and it's hard to do, and talking about getting rich is easy and everyone wants to know how to do it. And that's my soapbox on the expectations and the successful transition thing, but it's just what I believe.
But the other part of that too is at some point in time over the last 10 or so years, the veteran community has started turning on itself. When I joined the Navy, nobody made fun of you for being proud to serve. And nobody made fun of you for saying that you were in service. And probably social media is to blame because it's to blame for every damn thing. But the evolution of this bro-vet culture where you're not as good of a veteran because you didn't do this, and this. You're not as important of a veteran because you don't have all of these ailments. Like this group of people who are probably, to be fair, like are the ones who got out, went back to their hometown with no reasoning, no purpose, no whatever, and are now like just living on the internet, making everyone else's life miserable. But this evolution of this bro-vet culture where we attack each other instead of supporting each other has done a lot of damage because now people are like, I feel like I shouldn't talk about my service or I don't want to share what I did. And I tell people I worked as Naval Special Warfare, like, oh, you're a chick. I'm like, oh my. Yeah, I didn't say I was kicking the doors down with them. I said I worked with them. Like, that's a thing. Like, no, like, I wasn't a team guy. I was just lucky enough to work with them. But, oh, but you're a chick. There's no way you could have done anything. And, oh, if you only deployed to Kuwait, then that's not a real deployment. Like, shut the fuck up. Service is service, and 6 months away from your family, I don't give a shit where you are, is still 6 months away from your family. So this thing, this cancer that's in our community is making transitioning harder than it needs to be.
I think what a lot of people need to hear is your military service isn't a zero sum game. Like,
No.
just because, like, if I talk about my service, that does not degrade what you did. It
Absolutely.
just, like, we both are just talking about it,
Mhm.
and we act like we're this massive population of people when we're not. We're real small. Like, it's a very small number of human beings, and I think that that's the more insidious side of why people don't talk about their
Mhm.
mental health, why people don't talk about how they're doing, why people just, like, grit their teeth and push forward. Like, that's the insidious side.
Yeah.
The more like, I would say, noble side of that, and and you alluded to this early on in the podcast where you're like, I don't like to talk about my stuff
Mhm.
because I either feel like there's a chasm or just people won't understand, or like those things that you tell yourself. We in the military, especially someone who's worked at closer side of the pointy end of the spear like you did, at least one person who got really fucked up
Mhm.
in service. And that's always in the back of your head because you're like, yeah, I'm sad, but I didn't lose my legs like Steve or
Mhm.
whoever. Like Bob got his arm blown off by an IED. So I shouldn't
Yeah.
talk about my problems, because then what what about the person who came home maimed? What about the person who came home with debilitating PTSD? They watched all their teammates get killed or whatever. And so then because, like, we all know that person, and we're all programmed with that self-sacrificial nature to go, I need to shut up so that that person can get the attention that they need. And I think that that is noble, but then it also leaves a lot of people out to dry, and then they end up killing themselves in their nobility.
It can
And
be very damaging, that
yeah.
that thought process. And if there's anything anyone can hear, it's your service matters, you matter. And the comparison thing, you are not less of a veteran, you are not less deserving of care and help and guidance than somebody who did 16 combat deployments. Does that person also deserve care and support and guidance? 100%.
Mhm.
But do not degrade your own serve. There'll be plenty of people to tell you you haven't done enough in your life. Like, you don't need to be one of them. You don't have to add to that cacophony of voices telling you you're not good enough. And I see this too with, I had friends who never put in for VA benefits. And when I asked them, like, why? I didn't do anything. I was only in for 4 years. I only did one deployment. I don't deserve it. And it's always the same. Like, you're still a veteran. You still
Yeah.
served. You still spent time away from your family. At least go talk to someone and put in a claim. Even if you get rated at 0%, that can be increased later. So that if something does come up down the road,
Mhm.
you have at least one place to turn to. And the mental health thing you mentioned, I think we're fortunate in the fact that it's now less taboo to speak out about needing help. There's more voices telling you that it's okay than there were when I first joined the military, and even when I left. We still hadn't quite got to this place where you're allowed to talk about your feelings, you're allowed to talk about how you're coping. I think we're starting to see a shift in that to make it more normal, and I'm hoping that helps a lot with this. But,
So
remains to be
my counterpoint to that, I agree. I think people, like, I don't know, you see a lot of great folks who are saying like it's okay to talk about your mental health. And I think that those are great messages and people need to hear that. The problem is we now exist in an age, again, talking about social media, self-awareness is rare in my opinion. And
Mhm.
there's a very big difference between someone knowing, like, I guess the analogy that I would use is everybody wants to be a fighter pilot. You go in, Top Gun 2, and you're like, Maverick's the fucking shit, man. Like, I want to fly an F 18. And then it's like if all the pilots go out on social media and go, you're allowed to be a fighter pilot. That's cool. Still don't know how to be a fighter pilot. Like
Mhm.
that doesn't embolden, that doesn't equip me with the tools to go do the thing that I'm now allowed to go do.
Yeah.
And like we have a lot of people saying like talk about your mental health and we don't tell anyone how to do that thing. And I'm not saying that it's empty, but I am saying it's not very effective
Well,
because
I can shed some light on it if you'd like. I mean, I left service with a TBI and a diagnosis of post traumatic stress and a couple other acronyms in there to do with my head. My mental health is the thing I'm ranked got the highest percentage for, and I would like that. Everyone's telling you can go, you can go, you can go, you can go. I think I went through 4 different shrinks in less than a year trying to find somebody who didn't do either the whole I got told a lot, just fake it till you make it, eventually you'll get to the other side, which fine, there's a neuroscience element there, but that just saying that phrase to somebody doesn't do them any good. And the other one just where you talk for 45 minutes and then at the 50th minute you've done nothing but talk and dredge up all of this stuff and they go, oh, and that's the time, gotta see you later, and you wander out and you're like, oh my god, now I brought all this stuff back up and I don't know what to do with it. When it comes to your mental health, there is one thing I will say: it is 100% every individual's responsibility to take care of their shit. It is not my husband's job to make sure I am okay, and it's not my family's job to make sure I'm okay. It is my job, as hard as it is, because I have been such a fighter in my life. Like, I really struggled. The second I got my labels slapped on me, I was like, this is it. I failed, because now I haven't been able to get through this thing without being diagnosed with this. But you, everyone will get to a point where you have to make a decision to either take some proactive actions to get better, or the doors are going to open up on you and you're going to end up going down a very dark slide that is really hard to come back from. And if you don't have the people around you, it's a really hard climb. But find someone, you military one source, ask the VA, try to find someone in your local town, look at any resources. There are so many nonprofits that will help you connect with someone that has your best interest at heart, which is you getting to a place where you are okay. But you have to be willing to accept some incredibly hard truths about yourself. It's not fun to be like, okay, I didn't come out unscathed. I thought I did, but I didn't. But keep going. Like, try. Don't just, yeah. And this influencer thing, like you said, like it's everything from like I got out of the military and a year later I was a multimillionaire because I invested in this. It's the exception to the
well,
rule.
yeah, and it's people are always going to like people are really gullible and they want a light at the
Mhm.
end of a dark tunnel, and there aren't a lot of darker tunnels than separating yourself from the service. And so
Yeah.
people are just looking for the easy answer and like the one that they can figure out, that they
Mhm.
don't have to figure out themselves. And what a there isn't a better spot in the world to pitch a tent and set up some business to capitalize on people's fear. And the harsh and sad reality that exists is this episode of the podcast maybe 100 people will see it. Hopefully, more
Mhm.
people see it someday. If I post a video on how to make $1 million and also get 100% VA disability rating, I'm going to
Mhm.
crush that shit. Like, that is going, people will eat that up
Yep.
because people want to get rich. They don't want to hear your transition battle is going to be hard. It's going to be almost entirely mental. It's going to be entirely up to you because who you are as a person is different than who I am as a person.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to gut it out and learn how to rebuild yourself from the ground up.
Mhm.
That's hard. It's scary and it's not easy. And so people just want to get rich quick or get fixed quick scheme. And it's unfortunately easy to prey upon a lot of people because they're in desperate straits when it comes
Yeah.
to separating their identity from the military, and it's tough.
And
So,
transitioning, like, it is one of those things where it's really easy to screw up.
oh, for
It's
sure.
so easy to do it wrong.
Mhm.
And like you said, like you have to make the decision. Like there's a reason your podcast exists. There's a reason that this is a conversation that has to happen. It's because over the last 20 plus years of our generation being in the service, we haven't figured it out.
No.
And I don't know, maybe we were all spoiled or something where this idea of like, or I'll joke about boomers. Well, my day you had to walk 16 miles uphill both ways. But there's a little truth in that. They don't talk about, like, my grandparents don't talk about their mental health or anything, but they know how to work hard.
Mhm.
You have to be okay with the fact that this sucks.
Mhm.
Like, and it might not suck for a long period of time. Maybe it's just a couple of weeks. Maybe you figure it out and it's like, okay, I'm going to do the hard work up front, get through this the right way, and you're miles ahead of the average veteran. And that would be a great place for everyone to get to. But you have to be willing to put in the work and you have to find an honest reason for why you're doing it, because it's really easy to play the victimhood Olympics and
Mhm.
compete in that and be like, nobody understands me because nobody went through what I went through and nobody's done this, nobody's done that. I can't find a single person in the world that has a similar life story to mine. It
Mhm.
doesn't make me special. I still screwed up my military transition just like everyone else. And but you can find a way forward. There is a reason to keep going, and it does not look like quitting and turning the lights off and crawling into bed every day. That's not it.
I think that people have an expectation for what progress looks like, and when in reality, any forward momentum in a battle such as a military transition in and of itself is progress and it should be celebrated, but we're not used to celebrating small wins. We want big, grandiose, strategic level wins,
We
not
want the Instagram post wins. We want the ones
yeah.
that we can throw on social media and everyone goes, "Oh
Yep.
my god, that's amazing." And
Yep.
how long does that high last for, really?
Yeah. It immediately after it ends the second you post it.
Mhm.
Something that I wanted to ask you is you said it took you a very long time to realize that the military wasn't your life, it was just a chapter of your life.
Mhm.
What was that journey of discovery like for you? And let's start there. And then I want to
Okay.
get some you might give me the advice in your
Mm.
story. So,
It was so my husband is still active duty and he's EOD, so he has a cool job. And as much as I told myself like I will be fine, this is going to be cool. Oh man, do I get jealous when he gets to go out and do cool shit? Absolutely. Like, is there a part of me that's like, man, I could really go for a deployment right about now? Yep. And you and I'll talk about like going from being like active duty to a dependent on a different day, but it's time and it was a lot of work and it was a lot of getting angry, not knowing why I was angry, and then doing the work to figure out why I was angry. And it all comes back to I never thought about the after ever. I just didn't think about it. And it sounds so dumb to say now, Like, because the rational part of me is like, Kristy, what are you talking about? Of course you thought at least once about the after, but in the moment I didn't. And part of what kind of tripped me up when I left the Navy was that we stayed in San Diego and my husband went on another deployment, and I was still where I was in the same city I served in. I was going to the same military hospital for stuff. I was seeing all the same people. I just wasn't in uniform anymore. And it was like a weird, this isn't right. I should still be in uniform, and I don't want to be called ma'am, and I don't want to be asked for my sponsor social. And oh man, it got dark. It got dark for a while. Probably a little bit of resentment is a really strong word because I do not resent my husband. But it was a little bit of that, of like, I resent the fact that you still get to do all of the cool things that I miss doing, even though I know that I'm looking back at my career and I'm only seeing the highlight reel. I'm not seeing the stuff that made me miserable. I'm not thinking about the bad stuff. I'm only seeing the cool highlight clips.
When you're out there searching for, well, I'll just read back words that you said earlier on the podcast, which is once you hit a specific high, everything after that feels incredibly mediocre or
Yeah.
unfulfilling. And
Yeah.
so
And it
as
was a
you're in,
struggle.
yeah, because you're in this search for this new purpose, and then it's really easy to go and look back on your Team 7 deployment or your other time in naval special warfare and go like,
Yeah.
fuck, it was really nice when I knew exactly what I was doing and I had a thing and I was showing up and I was around people that I enjoyed being around, and like it's easy to look back and go, why can't I just have that again?
Mhm.
And oh, go ahead.
Yeah. I was gonna say there's this lie too. There's a book called, I think it's called The Happiness Trap. Don't quote me on that because I might have the title wrong, but it's this idea that I am in a place where I should be happy, right? I should be happy. I have a great life. I should be happy. And so you start thinking about, why aren't I happy? But then the first thing that happens is you start going, because I'm not doing this cool thing. I'm not doing this cool thing. I found myself sitting in a high rise in San Diego at a desk, and I could only see like one window, and I was like, "Oh, why am I here?" Like, it's like not even a year ago I was playing tag with a helicopter in a boat, like, and now I'm here listening to this jackass talk about some stupid nonsense that I don't care about. And mm, you have to just get to a point where you make the conscious decision to say, thanks very much. Every time the memories pop up, you just say to yourself, that was awesome. It doesn't serve me to dwell in that place anymore. And that can be for the good things, it can be for the bad things. I've gone through a lot of bad stuff too. It it doesn't serve your current life any value to sit in those moments, because they aren't your life anymore. They're behind. You can't go back. You can either stay put or you can keep moving, and staying put's not really an option for a lot of people. You have to find a way to keep fighting. And but it comes down to, you'll have a moment where you decide, okay, I want to figure out what's next. I want to figure out what I'm supposed to be doing with this one life that I get. I'm not special in the fact that I know too many people who did not get enough time in life. It was taken too quickly from them. So when you start to think about that, okay, what is it I want with this one life? You have to decide then to consciously close the book, turn the page, say that was an epic part of my life. And it was really cool. And I learned a lot about myself, and I've made some great friends. But I have to take a step forward.
And I think that that's so important, and I think that the if you take the time and you do that work on the front end to build your self-awareness, you
Mhm.
can distill what you did in the military down to the base natures that can exist outside of the military.
Yeah.
And so then you can go, like for me, I was a cyber warfare, I taught people cyber warfare before I got out of the military. a non a not self-aware Billy would go, I'll never have that again, so now I'm going to be sad about it. A self-aware Billy would go, what did I really like about that? I really loved the interactions with the people, and I loved the fact that I could pour into someone's life via education. Those aren't military specific concepts. I can find those elsewhere in the world, and I can find that feeling again. It's not this like secret thing that's only in the military that's locked away from me forever. But like you said earlier, if people don't do that pre-work up front, you're not going to realize that. And then you'll find yourself sitting in a corporate office building going like, I'm going to be sad forever because
Yep.
all the things that I loved were in the military and I'm never going back.
Mhm.
And I just think that's fundamentally untrue, provided you take the time to actually boil your passions and the things that made you happy in the military down to their true base natures. So,
But that's what I
but
love about this podcast, though, is because it's things like this that have these conversations. People like you and I, you said, we live on LinkedIn a lot.
Mhm.
There's a lot of people who are still in the military looking to look at their next chapter, and this will hopefully come across their feed because this is work you can do
Mhm.
while you're still in. It should be done while you're still in. You should take the time to figure out who you are
Mhm.
in the moments that the Navy doesn't control, or the Air Force, the military doesn't control, like the very few moments that aren't decided by the military. Take that time for yourself. What's that phrase? It's like self-care is not selfish or something like that. Put on a post-it or something. But if we could get more people to do the work before they end up on the outside, the transition process could be so much better for so many people, and maybe we can start turning the tide of like just how bad we're doing at it. Like, and it's, you don't have to become Marcus Aurelius, you don't have to write a book on stoicism. It's not about any of that. It's just really about finding some time to be like, okay, when you peel back all of this, who the hell are you really? And what is it you want from this life that you've got? Because it's not serving the military. As cool as that sounds, nobody wakes up every day and goes, hooray, I get to be in the Navy today. 99.9% of us woke up and went, shit.
Fuck.
Still
I
in
have
the
to do this
Navy.
again.
What am I doing? You're standing
Yeah.
on a field and it's raining. You're like, what was I doing in those moments? Try
Mhm.
to take back the reins of your mind and be like, okay,
Yeah.
why
Why
am
did
I
I
doing?
feel
Why
yeah,
did I feel
why
this?
yeah, and yeah, one of my most poignant images of what you just described is when I was a senior in college at school, we had to wake up every morning to go to mandatory breakfast. We had to wake up at 5:30 to march into the cafeteria. And we had an announcement section. We had this like staff tower that people would go and they would announce stuff on the PA while we were all eating. And God bless this girl. She was so stoked to be up there. She was so happy. She was just like one of those people who's just like happy to be alive. And she brought that into her announcements. And there were just too many angry people in that cafeteria every morning who hated her because she was happy and they were not. And I distinctly remember one morning, one of my buddies he was doing a bunch of really crazy stuff with airfoils that would eventually be put into like the F-35 program. He's a real smart dude, and he's just eating hard-boiled eggs because he hated everything else that they served at that cafeteria. And she one day this girl gets on the staff tower. It's like, hey everybody, are we gonna have a great Thursday? And he just starts going just like, fuck, 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 just starts screaming into his eggs. And every more time I woke up in the military and had like a bad day, that's what I thought of. And I'm like,
Screaming to his
and
eggs.
now I look back on that and I go, man, that was awesome.
Yeah.
But then I had to think about that and go like, I hated everything in that
Yeah.
moment. And it's just funny how you can like look back on those moments with like such like rose colored glasses and go, that was amazing. And then I was like, that was not amazing
No, but if
at
you're
all.
honest, if we're all honest
Yeah.
with ourselves, anyone who's like, "Oh man, I miss the military," or "Oh man, my life was so much better when I was in the military," we're all lying to ourselves.
Yeah. For
We're
sure.
all reacting to the parts of our brain that are tricking us into being like, "That was the greatest time in my life." When really maybe 5% of your career was the greatest time of your life, and the other 95%, you were dealing with dumb shit that you couldn't make sense of and you couldn't get out of. So that's the other thing too is like if you catch yourself going, "Oh man, I shouldn't have left," or "Oh, I shouldn't have done this," or "Shouldn't have done that." Really? Do you miss it? Do you miss I miss the people, like, I 100% will tell anybody, I miss the shenanigans and the nonsense that we used to try to get away with because I miss the people. Did I really miss the Navy for all those years? No, what did I miss? I missed knowing what I was doing when I woke up. I missed knowing every turn of my day what was supposed to be happening. I missed the one or two really cool things I got to do that week. Do I miss the rest of it? No, there's a reason I got out. So it's this like we sort of like trip ourselves and screw up what we're trying to do by being like, oh man, that was really cool. No. Think about that one time you were probably sweeping rain. It wasn't cool.
Yep.
Think about
Yep.
that moment.
Something you said at the beginning of this question was you did a lot of work to get to a point where you're able to realize that the military is just a chapter and have all these observations. For people who are listening who go like, "Ooh, I'd like to do some of that work now,"
Mm.
what would you recommend that they do? Like what's the what would be like the Christie to-do list for building this self-awareness?
Start writing.
Mm,
I don't mean like dear diary, today I ate 3 grapes. Just write. There is a power in writing that does not exist in a lot of other mediums. You have a pen. I would suggest doing it with a pen and paper. You're more connected that way. You own your words as you're writing them. Nobody can tell you what to write. Nobody can tell you what to think. Nobody can tell you're right or wrong. You don't have to share it with anybody. There's no one going to judge it because it's just for you. There is something incredibly powerful about writing that allows you to start to evaluate at your own pace things that are coming up for you. So if you sit down and you're like, okay, and you just start writing, and it can be as simple as like, oh, this just popped into my head that one time that I was hanging out with so and so. Okay, I'm going to write about that thing. Then it's out, and you don't have to ever read it again. But writing, like if you're angry or if you've had a really one of those days where like everything like I just want to quit, go write because there's a power in your own words that no one can take from you. And this everything technology and whatever else, I do think there's something very special about just pen on paper by yourself somewhere, and you don't have to do it for an hour. You can do it for 5 minutes. Just start writing. You'll be amazed at what comes up.
yeah, I think that taking the time to be that self-aware and
Mhm.
really locking it in via the medium of writing, I think is incredibly important. And I think I don't know, it goes back to the my opinion of I just don't think people are self-aware because I think people don't like to sit with their thoughts because that's really it's a scary place to be.
Well, yeah,
um
how often do you find people who are able to just sit in a
sit.
quiet room? Like, look, the next time you're in a waiting room,
Yeah.
look around the waiting room. How many people are able to just sit there patiently and wait for their turn? Guarantee everyone's got a phone or a magazine or they're trying to distract themselves from their own brain.
Yep. Yeah, because it's scary in there, and
Mhm.
people don't like to do that.
Yeah.
For you, as somebody who has started wrote a book, started the podcast, and you've really had this throughout your entire life, how have you built up the ability to seize the initiative to go out and do all of these new things, especially once you're out of the military? Because I think for a
Mm,
lot of people, being out of the military in and of itself is really scary, but there's a lot of things that you should go out and do to improve your position in terms of your mental health, your
yeah.
lifestyle, whatever, but that requires motivation and it requires you to go out and do. So how have you gone out and done in your life?
Motivation is one of those things that there are some days where I wake up and I'm like, man, I get to have a good day today. And then there are the days I wake up, I'm like, I don't want to work out. I don't want to eat healthy. I want to sit on my couch and binge watch Netflix and eat chicken nuggets. It doesn't, but there's always a voice in my head that's like, is this really what you want to be doing with yourself? Really, honestly, is this the Kristy that you want to be? And that voice, I think, exists in everybody. There's always that voice of like, is this really what you want to be doing? Before I went fully into entrepreneurship, I was working for a big company out of Finland. I was their operations manager. And I remember being on a Zoom call that was supposed to be 20 minutes long, and it ended up being 3 hours long. And when I got off of the computer, I was exhausted. And I wasn't tired because I had been thinking. I was tired because I'd been staring at a computer screen. And that voice popped in. I was like, is this really what you want to be doing? Like, is this really why you left the Navy? Is this really how you want to make the most of your time? Or are you happy with this? If you're not happy with this. And I wasn't. And I think we all have that internal navigation of like, this isn't really what I want to be doing. Is so scary though. It can be really scary to take a like to bet on yourself and to put yourself out there because you're this fear of judgment from people, fear of being told that no, you don't have the authority to speak on that, or no, you should just be quiet, and the haters on the internet. But that voice will guide you forward. That is this really how you want to be spending your time? And if you can listen to that, you're going to be able to take more chances and then keep going once you've taken the chance, because it's quite simple for anyone to record and podcast episode, right? You can get your first one. You kind of work through the, ooh, okay, this is a little bit nerve-wracking, but you can do one. Can you do two? Can you do three? And if you get to the point where you've done like 15 or 20, you're like, okay, I don't really want to, I like sat with this for a while. It's not what I want to be doing. Okay, what do you want to be? What do you want to be doing? How do you want to be spending your time?
Yeah. It is interesting. The one advice that I'll give to people who are like, "Ooh, what if people are like the haters or whatever on the internet?" One of the things that I laugh about, cuz I work out a decent bit, when I'm talk to people who don't work out and they go like, "I don't lift weights cuz I don't want to get too big." And then I go, "If only it was that easy." Like, I wish I had that problem. Like, "Oh no, I bench pressed once and now my pecs are too big."
Oh
Like,
god, I deadlifted
shit.
so much today. It was
Yeah.
such
and
a hard
I know that to be true. Like, exercise takes a lot of time and before you ever really see results. And my advice to people who are scared about putting stuff out because or stepping out because they're like, but what about people who will judge me? It's like, if you have so much initial success that you have haters, like,
Wait, yeah,
congratulations.
I mean,
Like, you're
amazing. Tell me the
yeah,
secret. Like, tell
yeah,
me.
exactly. Yeah, like, you most likely no one's gonna know you exist,
Mhm.
and that's okay.
But
But
also
yeah,
think about the person, because like we're all going to end up with one. I've had a couple of being like, "Oh, here we go, another person who thinks they know about this, this, and this." I just said you kill them with, "Oh, thanks for so much for taking the time out of your busy day to leave me a comment. I really appreciate it. Thanks for stopping by." Because really, at the base of it, how sad must that person's life be that not only did they not keep scrolling, they then took the time to think up a response in their head and then post it. And they've probably kept coming back to their comment going, "Oh, I bet I burned them good." There's not a very fulfilled person on the other side of that computer screen.
for
So
sure.
let them do
I
it.
yeah, I agree. So the last thing that I'm interested in diving into for you is your podcast and also your
Mm,
book. How
mm.
did that come about for you as someone who actually decided to step out and do stuff on their own, write, record podcasts, set all this stuff up? Like, what was that? What's that story like for you?
I'm actually a huge introvert, so it's been a bit of a journey. I'm like an extroverted introvert. Like I will have to go recharge after this. But that job I was talking about, the operations manager, I quit that job because I was at the point where I was like, I can't keep doing this. And I can't keep working for people like this because I've worked for the same kind of person, sort of like hit or miss my whole life, and I don't want to do it anymore. And I reconnected with a mentor of mine, and she just said, well, if you're so unhappy about it, why don't you do something about it? I said, well, okay. She goes, all right, I dare you to write a book. I dare you to sit down and write all the things that you would do differently. And what I thought I was going to write was a book about how to create really cool operations and systems inside your business to help you out. It turned into something completely different. It turned into lessons I've learned from 2 different militaries, lessons I've learned from amazing leaders, terrible leaders, what I have observed. It's like a storytelling of things I've observed that great teams do. And then I was talking about, oh, maybe I should start a podcast, this, that, and the other. And another comment was basically like, well, you talk all the time anyway, so why not put a microphone in front of your face and record some of it? And I thought it was just going to be me monologuing, putting stuff out into the ether, going, sure, people listen to it if they want to listen to it. And then it took off unexpectedly. And I've reconnected with some people I served with. I've met some people from, there was a British Army officer that I connected with, and he's living in Costa Rica. Just randomly connected with him, wanted to talk about his stories. And it's been a trip, but I keep coming back. I've always loved writing. The hardest part of all of this was sharing the things that I love to do with the world, because I was always told that that's not a way to make a living. You're not gonna make a living if you're a writer. You're not gonna make a living if you're an artist. And now we live in this age where if you have an internet connection and you've got the ability to put yourself out there, you can carve a space for yourself in the world and make an impact. And that's the thing, is I just want to change how we build our teams and how we interact with each other. And it's been a strange snowball of events. Like I did one thing and then somebody gave me the opportunity to do something else. And I said, okay, fine, I'll give it a go. And now here I am.
That's cool. What do you think is one of the biggest things what is one of the biggest lessons that you've learned from your podcast so far?
That's a good question. I think one of the biggest things I have learned is it didn't come from a guest. It came from the fact that I wanted to quit. I wanted to not do it. There was a distinct moment in time where my book launch didn't go exactly how I wanted it to go. And I thought, great, I've screwed this up. I need to take a minute, take a big step back, reevaluate what I'm doing. Instead, I got a message from somebody, this guy named Joseph Van Dusen. He's the B-2 bomber pilot. And he's like, Kristy, I've read some of your articles. I've been following you. I want to talk to you. And I thought in my head, maybe I'll just interview him. And the fact that I wanted to stop, what is it? It's like never quit, because that's the moment that the miracle generally happens. So that's the biggest thing I've learned, is do not expect overnight success, because it doesn't happen. It's very rare for it to happen, especially if you're just a normal person. Like I didn't kill Osama bin Laden. Was never going to be an overnight #1 bookseller. I'm not J.K. Rowling. But if you're feeling like, oh, I don't know, I might quit, I should turn back, or that fear is starting to creep in, look at the fear as the challenge and don't quit in that moment, because the next step you take will be when the good things start to happen.
I think it's great advice. So before we wrap up the show, last question, which is a little bit more general version of what you just did. What is the final piece of advice that you would like to leave the guests with? Not the guests, the listeners.
The listeners. Final piece of advice. When things are looking really rough, just remember what the Monty Python boys say. Nobody expects a Spanish Inquisition.
I
And if
love
that
that.
one doesn't work, if you don't know what I mean by that one, then just revert to Life of Brian and always look on the bright side of life. But
There you go. Wow, you're okay. So you're a Monty Python
oh, Monty Python,
enjoyer.
Blackadder, Faulty Towers, give me all of that.
Okay, okay, okay. That's awesome. That's great. Life of Brian's probably one of
And
my favorite movies.
go kill some things on Halo. Like go Halo up and kill a bunch of aliens. Go wreak havoc on the Covenant. That usually helps too.
I love that. I love that. As a video game guy, I dig that. I appreciate
Yeah.
that advice. That's the
Yeah.
advice that everyone should take home more than
Go
anything else in
kill
this
some
podcast.
things. It
Yeah.
works. Not in real life. On a video game.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Kristy, thank you so much for coming on today. Thank you so much for having the courage to talk about your life story, to talk about what you've gone through. I know that people listening to this will benefit from what you said here today. So I want to, on their behalf, say thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an awesome experience. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and it's been great. Kristy will also be featured on another podcast here soon. So look out for that. But for everyone who's still listening, thank you so much for making it to the end of the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you along on this ride with us. If you like this content, please follow, subscribe, comment, and most importantly, share with those who need to hear this message. And we will see you on the next episode of the Post Military Podcast. Peace.